Welcome to Petronoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Romito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, Petronoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is Petronoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to Petronoia. I'm your host, Dan Romito. I am sitting here today with Doug Sandridge. He is the Senior VP at Fulcrum Energy. I was connected to Doug because in my ADD, my ADD took over, and I'm searching for people in the oil and gas space that are also massive proponents of nuclear, and Doug totally fits the bill. So before we dive in, Doug, would love a breakdown and a quick introduction of how you got to sit in the current seat, what you're working on, and then we'll just get rolling, man.
Sure. I'm a lifer in oil and gas. I started, actually, we were just laughing about this last night. I started my very first job right about my 16th birthday when I was living in Midland, Texas, and that was in 1975.
Okay.
So July of this year is 50 years since I had my first job in oil and gas.
Wow.
And so I grew up in the industry. My dad was a geological engineer, worked for Phillips Petroleum his entire career. And I spent most of my childhood living overseas. My dad was and mom were eager to go see the world, and they got an opportunity to go chase oil around the world. And so we lived in Europe and South America, and my dad's moved to Africa when I was in college. And so I got to spend most of my childhood overseas. Amazingly, he got transferred back to Midland, Texas when I was a sophomore in high school.
Okay.
So of course you just follow your father around when he's doing his stuff, and so
Right.
finished high school in Midland. So I came by it honestly. I went to University of Oklahoma, never intended to be in the oil and gas business. I wanted to be an architecture major.
Okay.
I was an architecture major, but it just didn't suit me. It's a really hard curriculum. I still love architecture, but I didn't do that, and I enrolled in the College of Engineering. You have to declare a type of engineering. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I completely it's just a lark. But as a lark, I just declared nuclear engineering as my major. And
Just be like, I don't know what I'm going to do nuclear engineering, just like that.
it sounded cool. I mean, obviously, I was just taking core classes, physics, chemistry,
Yeah.
calculus, all this stuff. So I never ever got into any nuclear engineering classes. But it was a good pickup line for the ladies. It's that sorority girl. Yeah, I'm a nuclear engineering major.
Yeah. Just a nuclear engineer.
I'm dating myself, but my sophomore year at University of Oklahoma was the year that Diablo Canyon accident. That's silly. The 3 Mile Island accident happened in Pennsylvania in the spring of 1979, and it became apparent that nuclear was, going to have some troubles. It was the nuclear industry had been in trouble for a decade prior to that for a whole variety of reasons. And so, a lot of people like to say 3 Mile Island was the death of nuclear in the U.S., but it was not the death. It was sort of the final nail in the coffin, but there was a lot of other factors that had caused nuclear energy
Okay.
to suffer through the 70s. So I ended up transferring into oil and gas, got a degree from the University of Oklahoma in petroleum land management, and I spent all my college career working out in the field, roughnecking, mechanic, pumper, did all the field stuff. I loved working in.
You were Billy Bob Thornton before Billy Bob?
Yeah. My favorite job was working as a derrick hand. I absolutely loved working on a drilling rig, working at the dock of the derrick. And a couple of years after I'd done that, my dad kind of approached me one day and he said, "Son, this is not." He could see that it would be the light in my eyes, like I was going to be a drilling engineer or something. He said, this is no job for a family man. You need to do something else. I ended up in petroleum land management. Spent my entire career working for a variety of oil and gas companies. And I'm currently working for an oil and gas company that has properties in multiple states, Texas and North Dakota and Wyoming, Colorado. I concentrate on a particular asset, mostly in Colorado. So that's where I'm working now. We have a beautiful oil field, the most beautiful oil field in the world at 8,200 feet up near Steamboat, Colorado.
Okay.
And that's what I spend most of my time working out.
Well, you're also, I don't want to say moonlighting, but you're running point on this interesting group, Oil and Gas Executives for Nuclear. And I sort of alluded to it in the introduction. How did that come to be? Like, what's the backdrop of that story? Because for the longest time, I joked there seemed to be like this Bloods versus Crip turf war between oil and gas and nuclear. And now it seems like they're more converging to like a hand-only by moment.
I think that was not really true, to be honest, for the most part. But I mean, I'm going to step back to 2009. I started teaching and lecturing at University of Oklahoma and other colleges. I lectured at Western State in Gunnison, Colorado, and also Colorado School of Mines. And really, about that same time, I had gotten a master's degree in global energy management at University of Colorado. Okay. And I realized for the first time that there's a whole new world of energy beyond oil and gas. For my almost my whole career, I'm just thinking it's just oil and gas. I'm an oil and gas dude. Right. And then I realized I'm really an energy person, and I work in a subsector of that industry. And I realized there's electricity, there's renewables, there's geothermal, and all these other segments of our industry. And I became fascinated with it. About the same time, my kids are graduating. And so it's kind of hard to spend time advocating for other people's industries when you've got a 60-hour-a-week job and a wife and 3 kids and soccer practice and piano recitals and blah, blah, blah. But my kids were grown. I was starting to teach classes at universities, and I realized this beautiful big world of energy. And I really started acquainting myself more with all the other forms of energy, and I felt like if I'm teaching these classes, these students are smart, even the undergraduate ones. You got to be in your the undergrad students, you still have to be on your toes,
right?
Because you don't want to appear that you know less than they do. So I was, voraciously reading, listening to podcasts, and yada yada yada. And so at that time, I started to realize, of course, that this pipe dream of net zero carbon emissions was a pipe dream.
Yep,
there's the pipe dream that we're going to replace fossil fuels with renewables. And I also realized that, decarbonization is important to a lot of people. And it occurred to me that if you're going to have a serious conversation about decarbonization and still have a viable energy sources for a vibrant economy, you're going to need nuclear. I mean, it just made sense. And so for me, I started to come around to the idea that nuclear energy really needed to be a bigger part. And so I'm thinking, but what are we doing here? Yeah. And about that same time, we started to see a lot of nuclear energy, nuclear power plants being shut down in the U.S. And I guess the watershed moment, the moment I became radicalized in favor of saving our nuclear was when they closed Indian Point back then, 2021, I think it was. And I was just very, I thought this is stupid. This is the low-hanging fruit. If we wanted to do anything that would give us safe, reliable, affordable electricity that's low carbon, keep your existing nuclear power plants open. I wasn't even advocating at the time building new nuclear.
And why was that one in particular shut down? Like, what was the rationale?
Political. Sure. I mean, Cuomo had made a promise that he was going to shut it down. He had rich, blue-haired Manhattanite people that were giving him money, and he's taking a lot of money from. There was a lot of environmental groups, river keepers, and others in New York that were pumping a lot of money into his campaign, and it was just symbolic more than anything else. Yeah. And I even. I typically don't get very political in my writings and my posts and stuff because once you go that route, then you lost half your audience and choose the half you're trying to impact.
Right.
And so I'm very careful about that. The other reason I'm very careful is my kids hate it when I say anything political, so I don't want to embarrass them. But I was so angry about this. I wrote a post on LinkedIn that got a lot of traction.
Yeah.
Democrats are not serious about climate change, because if they were, they would not be shutting down all these plants, because it was mostly happening in Democratic states.
That's the thing I don't get. Like, I mean, not to go off on a tangent, but you bring up a really good point is, like, when you go back to see some of the most adamant opponents of nuclear, it's environmental NGOs, and connecting the dots, at least for me, just from a purely understanding, it's like, why would an environmental NGO be so against nuclear? Like, I've never really understood that. And in talking to some of them, they actually mention it's like this generational thing. Like, the old timers and the environmental NGOs are very anti-nuclear, and sort of like the younger people, in their 20s, early 30s, whatever it may be, are increasingly more pro-nuclear. Do you agree with that, or is that something that you're?
I do agree with that. I mean, I hate to say it, because most of those people are my generation, and so, but there are a lot, and I do know for a fact that a lot of these organizations are sort of having an internal risk right now. And you're right, exactly right. It's along age groups. So there's the young members of the Sierra Club who are saying, is this really what we should be doing? And the older gray-haired ponytail guys in San Francisco and
Birkenstocks.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a internal battle going on even within many of those NGOs, that they're all anti-nuclear, and they do have a lot of money, and they do have a lot of influence. And so that, anyway, I saw this happening, and I'm like, this is really, really stupid. And I ended up getting involved in some advocacy groups.
Okay.
And mainly, to be honest, I was just trying to learn. It wasn't like I was sitting there really active and driving the agenda. I was part of these groups, and I'm sitting on the sidelines on mute. If I'm on a Zoom call, on mute, listening and learning. I'm learning about advocacy. Another reason I was sort of on mute and trying to kind of be a fly on the wall, so to speak, is that, as you might imagine, that we are in the midst of a nuclear renaissance. I mean, we can all debate at what point we are and whether it's going to be successful and so on and so forth. But we are in the midst of an emerging renaissance in nuclear energy. And the reality is that this has been driven in large part by people who are climate catastrophists. This is driven by people who are very, very climate concerned. They would not ordinarily have embraced nuclear energy, or they might not have ever found it. But now that they are so concerned about the climate, they see nuclear is the only. They recognize limitations of wind and solar.
Yeah.
And so they've come to nuclear energy through the climate cause. And as a result of that, if you are really, really climate concerned, then you probably don't like oil and gas. You probably don't like fossil fuel people. So with a lot of these groups that are pro-nuclear, a lot of these advocacy groups, it's filled with people who love nuclear, but they also don't like fossil fuels. And as a result, they don't like me. I've had some say, why are you in this group? And why are we letting this oil guy in the group? And blah, blah, blah. And fortunately, most of them are not that way. And fortunately, everyone's like, this is a big tent. And if you're here for pro-nuclear purposes, then we're going to support you, even if you are an oil and gas guy. Mm-hmm. So I have kind of been fighting that. And Mark Nelson, I don't know if you know Mark Nelson, but he is one of the premier advocates for nuclear energy, and he really started a lot of this work on saving existing nuclear plants, both in the United States and overseas. He would be a great interview for you.
Yeah. I don't know him. I've seen some of his work. You're right. One of the interesting points that he actually brings up, and I've seen this with like Schellenberger and some of the other, there's an irony on, if you're pro renewables, for example, let's just narrow it down to wind and solar, right? You need, I think it's 3 acres per gigawatt hour for solar and 26 acres per gigawatt hour for wind. And so you're building you're utilizing all this land and not generating that much, relatively speaking, electricity. But that's the whole irony that he's trying to make, is like, you guys are so, you say that you're so pro-environmentalist, yet you're taking up all this land for stuff that really doesn't work to the extent that we need it to work. So you just need more land. It's absolutely frustrating.
Yeah. And it's kind of an interesting story how I got connected with Mark.
Okay.
And he's I consider him a good friend now. I used to be. Oh, I'm a big fan of Robert Bryce. Robert's a good friend, and I used to listen to his podcast all the time. So I say I used to, because he doesn't do the podcast anymore because he's real busy and he puts so much demand that he doesn't have time to podcast. But at the time, for years, he was one of the premier podcasters on all things energy, and I loved it because he didn't just talk about one thing. It was anything related to energy he would talk about, and so that was part of my weekly education regiment. Was I had to listen to Robert Bryce every week, and he would do one podcast a week until Indian Point closed. And when they closed Indian Point, Robert was so angry that he did 4 one-hour podcasts back to back to back to back on 4 consecutive days that week. And he was furious. And by the time I finished listening to him, I was ready to run through a wall to help the cause. And the last person that I believe it was the last, or maybe I'm wrong, one of the last people he interviewed was Mark Nelson. And I didn't know Mark. I never heard of him. Of course, he worked for Schellenberger before he went out on his own to power plants. And I was so fascinated. I mean, he's a smart dude. Yeah. He's also very charismatic, and he speaks so well. He's a great speaker. And I listened to him. I said, I had to know this guy. So I found him on LinkedIn. I messaged him, or maybe Twitter, I can't remember. And immediately, he was really nice. He called me back. I remember where I was. I was at my mom's house in Oklahoma City, or in Norman, Oklahoma. And he called me, and we talked for hours. And it turns out his parents, his mom and dad, lived just a few miles from my mom. And my dad's deceased. But as it turns out, I'm a generation older than him, so I'm his dad's age. Okay. And so my dad and his grandfather worked together in the North Sea in the 1970s and 80s for the same company, for Phillips Petroleum. Oh my God! And then the last thing that we found out in that first conversation was that he went to Cambridge on a scholarship that was given to him by a good friend of my mom and dad.
Okay.
Wayne Allen and Judy Allen, who at the time was the CEO of Phillips Petroleum. Oh my God! Both of you common. And he then put me under his wing, and he was one of the ones that would always fight back when people would ask, why do we have this low-life oil and gas guy infiltrating our nuclear rigs? He's like, come on, guys.
Yeah, like grow up a little bit.
He's great. He'd be a great guest.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna track him down now that you said that. And to your point too, the stuff, Bryce's books are actually really, really good. He's a good writer. Taking a step back, you said something interesting that I hadn't really heard. When 3 Mile Island shut down in the late 70s, you said that it was already in trouble. Like, what do you mean? How is it already in trouble?
Well, I won't say that plant particular was in trouble, but nuclear industry.
Nuclear was in trouble. Okay.
Is in general. So, the 1970s, we had a couple of oil shocks. We had the 1973 oil shock, and then another one in 79. The price of oil was, went from $3 a barrel to probably in the early 70s to $30 a barrel by the end of the decade. Well, you know what a 10x increase in price does to your economy. And so the U.S. economy was struggling. We're in the bad cycle of inflation, high unemployment. We had the whole full Monty. We had everything bad going on in the 70s, and as a result of that, you had a poor economy meant there was low demand for electricity, and we were sort of overbuilt. We had built nuclear faster than we needed it, and so there was already before the accident happened, there was already plants and companies are saying, I think maybe we got to rethink whether we're going to finish this plant or whether we're going to start this new plant that's licensed. And so there was a lot of pressure on the industry. And then apart from that, we had seen the emergence of these NGOs that were coming out against nuclear energy and protesting it. So between the economic factors and the protests from the nuclear opponents, nuclear energy as a whole was already reeling in 1970.
Do you think, yeah, we had Scott Tinker on, and yeah, I mean, he was fascinating, and he made a really interesting point as well. And I'm sort of connecting the dots on this. He said that, y'all's generation lovingly, you were taught in school that like nuclear was this big bad animal. You had the Cold War, you had sort of the showdown with Russia. It was post World War II. Nuclear is still like this kind of like misunderstood component. Like the rise of the environmental NGO in the 70s, and respectfully, that's before my time. Like what catapulted them onto the scene in such an influential way?
Oh boy, that's a good question. That I may not be qualified to speak about that, but I think that's true. The problem was we were in the middle of a very hot Cold War. I mean, Cold War was there. You're doing drills where you're hiding under your desk to protect yourself from the nuclear blast. Like that was really going to help. I mean, so there were a lot of people people at that time when I was growing up were scared of the Cold War and of Russia and nuclear weapons. Like young kids today have been scared are scared about climate change.
Yeah.
And so there was that. Now, I personally was not one of those. I never really bought into that. And part of that may have been that I was living overseas. And so since I was living in Europe, I didn't feel it like the people in the U.S. and the Cuban Missile Crisis and stuff like that. So I didn't see it as much. And that may be one reason why I never felt.
So even though Europe, obviously, I mean, is connected to Russia, there wasn't that sort of, I don't want to say hysteria.
I think in a big picture way, it was sort of the U.S. versus Russia, even though Europe was really at the front line. I mean, right there on the border. But I mean, it was perceived as the U.S. versus USSR. And I just growing up in Europe, I just don't remember being taught to be scared of nuclear energy. But it's a total conflation. I mean, we had a Cold War going on that was very hot. I mean, it was very tense. And so you hearing about nuclear weapons all the time, and then if you conflate nuclear weapons with nuclear energy, it's easy for people to start thinking, well, if nuclear weapons are bad, nuclear energy must be bad. And so the industry did a bad job of making sure people understood they're completely different.
Right.
They shouldn't be conflated. So I think that's part of it. The other part is, I remember the Sierra Club. I mean, I've been told this, I've read this, and I don't know it personally firsthand. But I've heard that the Sierra Club at first embraced nuclear energy because it was clean.
Yeah.
And then they started thinking, we got a bunch of morons out there in the world, and can humankind, when I was young, they were saying eventually nuclear energy will be so plentiful, it will be so cheap, it will be virtually free. I mean, that was the saying, it will be virtually free. And so I think Sierra Club's like, if we have virtually free energy, virtually limitless free energy, there's going to be so much growth and so much destruction to the earth. And is humankind really mature enough and capable enough of handling that kind of prosperity? Yeah. And they said, I don't know if we really want to support nuclear energy because that's going to be the end of the world, not because of bombs or not because it's going to blow up, because there's going to be so much prosperity and the raping and the pillaging of the land. I've heard that. I can't say for sure.
It is an interesting point, though, because, we've had these conversations on, particularly net zero, where it's like the United States has to decarbonize. It's like, well, welcome to the party, because we've been doing it for like 40, 50 years, right? The advent of natural gas. But then, if you have to go net zero, that is a global dynamic, right? And you have to make sure that China, India, and Russia fall in line, which the probability of that taking place is almost zero, but people still get so centered on like the US needs to go to net zero. And it's like, look at the chart, like the emissions are, falling off a cliff, and we've done that for a variety of different reasons. But why is it the US has to do it? I mean, I know that we have to play a role, but in my opinion, and I'd love your perspective on this, we've exceeded expectations and definitely carried more than our burden of the emissions or decarbonization. Like, why does China in particular get such a pass? I don't get it.
Oh my gosh. I think it's largely lack of education, lack of understanding. I mean, you talk about if we can, you could not possibly completely decarbonize Colorado, where I live, or California. You couldn't possibly. But the amount of global emissions that would be mitigated if you went to net zero in Colorado would be a rounding error at 3 decimal points. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And I think it's almost societal OCD. I mean, they're just because obsessed with this idea.
Yeah.
And it can't happen. And to your point about it doesn't matter what we do here if everyone else isn't doing their fair share.
Right.
I think at first, when it first started happening 15, 20 years ago, we would say we got to go to net zero. And these countries like China and India would say, no, it's not fair. You guys have polluted the world for the last 100 years. You've become prosperous on the back of the climate. And we should be given the fair chance to do the same thing for our society. We should be able to become a prosperous society. I think that was the argument, 20 years ago. I mean, we can't make that argument anymore. We shouldn't be. But it is just totally preposterous. And I started a presentation about 5 or 6 years ago called The Hurdles to Net Zero Carbon Emissions. It was a nice way of saying net zero cannot happen, will not happen.
Yeah.
And when I first brought this out, I showed it to a bunch of people, and nobody seemed interested in this perspective. And everyone was like, yeah, whatever. I mean, literally, some really important people totally poo-pooed it. But now everybody's writing about how net zero carbon emissions are not only not desirable, so they're just not possible.
Right.
And, even Chris Wright recently has said that publicly, it's just nonsense. But I have 7 reasons, and we're not going to go into all 7 reasons why we cannot reach net zero carbon emissions.
Give me the top 3.
Well, I get just one. I used to say, First one, there's just one that could never happen. Or one reason that it's not going to happen. And so we didn't even need to talk about the rest. And I'm saying, if you are in California, or let's just say Colorado, where I live, if you're in Colorado and you say, I'm going to do everything I can to go to net zero carbon emissions, that's only going to happen if you import energy from other states. So the emissions are happening somewhere else. You stop producing cement, not this state, but we bring it in from Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Yeah.
So you're not eliminating carbon emissions. What you're doing is you're transferring those carbon emissions across the border into Wyoming, or into New Mexico, or into Utah, and then you're re-importing those emissions as products that were made in a different state. Or in California, that you'll never get to net zero because you're still going to be using all the 6,000 items that are made from petroleum.
Right.
You're going to be using them.
That's the thing that drives me nuts. It's become more of like, how can we game the system so on paper it looks like we're doing something great?
All virtue signaling.
Right. As opposed to just like, here's the economic realities. Like, you talk about the methane component. You can make the argument that in the United States, we have an abandoned well problem. But I would also make the counter argument that the ones that are holding up the potential solutions are environmental NGOs, because they just want to sue companies into, paying for like sins of the past. And, my argument to them, which I think is actually pretty rock solid, is like, good luck finding those companies because they're bankrupt. And oh, by the way, if you bankrupt the fossil fuel industry, you guys talk about the perils of stranded assets. Now you have stranded assets to the nth degree. So why don't we just focus on free markets and technology and innovation and kind of just ride the wave that we're already on? Because, that transition from coal to natural gas, and we'll still need coal, but, we've shown that we've already been decarbonizing. Like, I don't understand, and particularly with nuclear, like to your point too, like, is it truly zero emissions? Well, no, because theoretically you have to mine for uranium, and I don't understand how that ecosystem works. Maybe you can elaborate on. But I found that there are people in the environmental NGO community that are pretty pragmatic and super reasonable, and I enjoy talking to them. But there's also a very influential contingent that seem to just be complacent with sitting back and, let's call it what it is, pissing and moaning, right? And not really focused on solutions. You're nodding your head. I think you're agreeing with me.
Well, they've stopped being environmental organizations. They call themselves environmental organizations, but they're really just big money raising organization who, and in order to keep getting money, to keep those huge organizations going, they have to keep doing this stuff.
Yeah.
That those donors give to. It's interesting you said that. I've been working on an article about this for almost a year. I've been interviewing people, and my question is: California and Colorado too, to a lesser degree, or almost the same degree. You know, they're trying to push oil and gas completely out of the state. They're making permitting so difficult. It's almost impossible to get a permit in California. Almost impossible. And the idea is if you can't get permits, eventually oil and gas production is going to fall. And oil and gas production has fallen hugely in California. I mean, since the apex of their production, they were making 1.1 million barrels a day at one point.
Yeah.
And they could be making a lot more than that because they have resources really on par with Texas. They have shale resources that could rival Texas. They could be up another Texas if they wanted. But they were producing 1.1 million. I believe Texas is producing 5 million or something a day now. Their production is something on the order of 250,000 barrels a day in California now. So it's fallen substantially, and it's going to fall a lot more quickly in the upcoming years because they're not issuing any new permits, so nothing's going to replace. And so I asked the question to myself, is there something I'm missing here? Because I don't understand. As long as you're still driving cars and you're still using the 6,000 products that are made from petroleum, plastics, and everything else, if you're still using those, wouldn't it make more sense to use your own oil? Now, I understand intellectually, I don't agree with it, but there's an intellectual argument. I don't want oil and gas. I don't want anything oil and gas. And if you don't use any oil and gas, then you don't need to produce any. So I understand that. What I don't understand is you're going to continue using oil and gas at a very high level. I mean, you talk about driving in California. Everybody still drives in California. Millions of cars. And you're still using all the products that are made from petroleum. And yet you're getting rid of the petroleum. And you're getting rid of your own sources of petroleum. And you're getting rid of your refineries. And why? Why are you doing that? I understand if you don't want it, I understand it. But if you're going to get rid of oil and gas, you need to get rid of the demand at the same time.
Right. Do you think, I mean, once you're playing devil's advocate here and not to ruffle any feathers, do you think that's more of a failure on the industry conveying the proper narrative or the holistic narrative and connecting the dots? Because when you talk to somebody, and I've done this in California, do you like EVs? Yeah, they're awesome. Okay. How much more energy is going to be required to electrify the entire fleet, so to speak, in California? And they're like, probably a lot. I'm like, well, what is going to power that? And the vast majority of the time, not all the time, but a surprising chunk of the time, they'll say, well, we just need to go wind and solar. And you're like, okay, let's take a step back. Or they go into this rant about natural gas. And you're like, well, California still runs for the most part on natural gas. And when you plug your car into the wall, that's natural gas. And they think it's like some black magic, right? What is this trick you just laid upon me? But once again, if we're being sort of honest with ourselves, that's a battle of the narrative. So did the industry inherently fail to a certain extent on?
I think so. I mean, I've heard this my entire life with my dad in the industry. The oil and gas industry, fossil fuel industry, including coal, has been a terrible advocate for themselves. I mean, they have done a terrible, terrible job. And it's, they don't want to be out there publicly fighting for this cause. And so they've just been sticking their head in the sand for literally decades. For 60 years, they had just avoided the argument. And they've been placating them. I mean, it's just really sad. They've been unwilling to go to the fight, take the fight on. I mean,
do you think that's changing though?
I tell you the first person I spent my whole life watching oil and gas companies run and hide and put their head in the sand. And the first person I ever saw that was willing to take it on publicly, Wright.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years ago, and I was like, wow, there's somebody who's actually pushing back against the narrative, and he has the facts to back it up. And because of him, I have seen other people more willing. I will give him almost all credit for that. I never saw a high profile figure in our industry willing to push back. And now I see a lot of other people, not nearly enough, but a lot of other people. Trisha Curtis, I don't know if you know her, but
I know if we got Petro Nerds. Yep.
she's right from the school of Chris Wright, and she
Yeah.
was back. But there's a lot more.
When you can get a word in, she'll look.
Well, yeah, you can't. She's gotten her podcast has really gotten good. When she first started, there was no point in having a guest because there was so room for them to talk. But
I like Trisha. I mean, she'll appreciate that comment. I've told her that.
yeah, I had told her that too. She's doing great work. And the other funny thing I think about Trisha is, though, normally in order for me to listen to the most podcasts I possibly can every week, I usually listen to my podcasts at either 1.25 or 1.4 speed to get through them faster, so I have time for more. Trisha first, I have to listen at 0.75 speed because I cannot keep up with her. So I think that it is changing, but it's too little, too late, and especially someplace like California, people are just throwing up their hands and giving up. But it's interesting. So I've been interviewing people for the last year, and I'm working on the final version of my article, which I hope to get out in the next couple of weeks. And it was really interesting what the answers were. But to be honest, the number 2 reason that people don't want oil and gas in California is a very selfish, ugly, doesn't look good. Is they just don't want it in their backyard. I mean, I have people say, I still want to use oil and gas. I still want to ride my car. I still want to drive my Porsche, and I don't want an electric Porsche. I still want all those products. I just don't want them dirtying up my country. What you're saying is you want to push that to some other poor schmuck in some other place,
Right,
to produce that dirty stuff so I can live in a pristine life. So that's a lot of it. But the number one deal is, it's just all virtue signaling.
Yeah.
The politicians in California, the Sierra Club gives every single politician in California a grade at the end of every year. And if you don't have a passing grade, they're going to get somebody to run against you. So they all vote for this stuff.
it's crazy.
And some of them are, let's admit it, some of them don't understand it. The energy industry is complex. And some of those politicians don't understand what they're doing. They really think that they're doing the right thing. But the vast majority of them understand this is political theater at its best. And they know what they're doing, but they got to get the votes, and they got to keep Sierra Club off their back, and that's the reason they do it.
The NIMBYism is actually a really interesting point. Like, we're beginning to see this emerge in the data center world, right? There's a lot of articles that are sort of trickling into the press about various areas in rural communities pushing back on the data centers. And I'm going somewhere with this. I think it's going to become a really big political hot button because, first of all, these data center campuses are massive, right? Meta is building a campus in New Albany, Ohio, that's supposedly the size of Manhattan, which is pretty big. But all the tech bros are, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, but the tech bros are increasingly acknowledging that, like, hey, natural gas, like, that's sort of the way to go until we could figure out this bridge to scale nuclear. And so, like, in the not too distant future, you're going to have these rural communities have these massive data centers come into town, presumably suck up the vast majority of the juice. If a data center is, behind the meter or off the grid, at some point they're going to have to figure out how to connect to the grid because they're not going to have enough power, or they're producing excess power that they want to resell.
Either way.
I think the tech community is in for sort of a rude awakening and beginning to experience what the oil and gas community experienced on the NIMBYism. Like, is that something that you're seeing, or am I off my rocker?
Absolutely. I mean, all these companies, Google, Meta, Microsoft, they're all have been all in on sustainable, clean energy, so on and so forth. I started seeing maybe 3 years ago, they recognized they don't have enough electricity. Right. They know it's not coming from wind and solar. They know it. Wind, solar, and batteries is not going to power the data centers. They want nuclear. That's why they're all getting behind nuclear. They want nuclear. But about 3 years ago, the smart ones started to say, secretly to themselves, nuclear is not going to be here in time. And quietly, behind the scenes, every one of these companies has started to recognize, well, gas is going to be the bridge to nuclear. And they're not advertising this. They don't want people to know. But they've got huge gas divisions, working in these organizations because they realize that if they don't do it, the other one will.
Right.
Microsoft doesn't do it. If Meta doesn't do it, Google's going to do it. They're going to do it. So it's happening everywhere. I mean, I know a company, I'm not going to use their name, who so totally committed to having nothing to do with oil and gas and with natural gas that, I mean, they couldn't even be associated kind of peripherally because they thought it would be negative to their image as this sustainable company. And now they are all in on gas. I mean, they are going gangbusters gas because they're not going to survive if they don't. So we are in this gas to nuclear transition, but it's really not a gas to nuclear transition. It's gas until we get nuclear on top of the gas. It's not. I was at a conference this week, and people were saying that, and I said, stop saying that. If you build gas turbines right now to bridge to your SMR that you're going to bring online in 5 years or 6 years or 7 years, when that SMR comes online, you're not turning the gas turbines off.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have so much demand for energy, you're going to be doing the gas turbines and the nuclear. Maybe you will stop building new gas turbines as you bring more nuclear on. But don't be so naive as to say this is just a temporary bridge and that we're not going to use the gas when.
Why does it take so long? I'm going through, I go through these phases, right? I was a Civil War guy for a year because I read everything about the Civil War. Then I was a World War II guy because I was reading, this is like Band of Brothers and all these shows were coming out. So the Pacific, I was reading all this stuff. And then now I've just sort of thrown myself into the nuclear thing. But, when World War II hit, there was a call to duty for hey, we need to get our stuff together and we need to produce ships and ammo and goods and all this stuff. The time is now. And once again, the stakes were clearly higher, but when you're talking about generative AI, I do think it's an arms race because it will in many ways dictate the balance of economic power, which determines the balance of military power, which determines the balance of global influence. So it's not like this is a cool thing and we like doing ChatGPT illustrations and oh my God, we need more power. This, for all intents and purposes, in my opinion, is an arms race. And we've sort of just accepted the fact nuclear would take, 5-10 years. And it's WTF, man, why the hell is this taking so long? So without, why is it?
It is, you're right. It's an existential threat. And I think that, for whether you hate him or love him, Trump and his team has understood that this is an existential threat and that we cannot sit around kind of piddling around and hoping that nuclear develops. And what they have done to advance nuclear in this administration and what Chris Wright and his team has done is not. They've done more in the last 6 months than has happened in the last.
Can you give me a couple examples? What?
Well, first of all, they are out there literally every single day promoting nuclear, changing regulations, changing the permitting process. Now for example, there's now hopefully a permitting path through the Department of Energy rather than through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So if you can't get it takes you years and years and years to get a permit through NRC. Now, we haven't seen how this is going to work yet, so we don't exactly know. But they've said, we're gonna have a path where you can you can get a permit through the Department of Energy rather than NRC. And so if that is in truth happening, then it's possible these things could be greatly accelerated. The other thing is that they are giving these some of these projects sort of war powers act. They've said we can through this war powers emergency, so to speak. I don't know if I got the right terminology. We can now use sources that we might not legally be able to use under normal circumstances because it's a matter of national security. The other thing that I think is really interesting, is going to make it easier, is you can cite these on federal lands and on federal, like Army bases and Air Force bases and so on and so forth. So, in fact, I had a conference call this morning with a utility here in Colorado who wants to put a nuclear power plant on an Army base. And they're, we're seeking my help to figure out how can we make this happen, because, the siting, trying to get a site permitted is tremendously cumbersome. But if you put it on an Army base, basically you need the base commander's permission. That's it. Yeah. You don't need anything else. So those are just a few examples in a short period of time where they're trying to roll out mechanisms and pathways to really accelerate deployment.
Does that make the NRC somewhat obsolete? I mean, I know one of Trump's directives is to like scale that government. There just seems, as it relates to, many things, but particularly nuclear, like just layers of bureaucracy that would force the failure of any corporation, right? So getting rid of these layers of bureaucracy, I don't know anyone at the NRC, but it just doesn't sound like they've been worth it, so to speak, for the longest time. What's the problem?
I don't know I don't really know what's going to happen with the NRC. I think the NRC, obviously, for the last few decades has been really an obstacle to advancement. Yeah. They've adopted some rules that basically made it virtually impossible to get permits. And those, they're really, I think there's some really, really strong efforts right now to get some of those rules changed. The linear no threshold rule. And
what is that? What does that rule mean? What is that?
Well, it's talking about how much radiation is acceptable, and at some point you can't, if you keep litigating and saying, well, you can always make it safer. Well, you can't always make it safer, but at what cost? I mean, It's like trying to get a car to be more gas efficient. Getting the first efficiency is pretty easy, and get the next round of
the conversations I had with my wife, with the boys, they're unless you want me to put them in a plastic bubble, right, and roll them down the street, they're going to be idiots, and something is going to happen just to mitigate how bad that is.
So I think they're going to roll that back. You can't just keep saying that you have that you can. You have to make it as. So this is actually another thing that they've been doing. This thing, you have to make radiation as low as reasonably possible. Well, what is reasonably possible? So you can always make it lower, but at what cost? To cut the risk in half costs you X amount. To cut it to a quarter is 5 times that amount. To cut it to a tenth is 100 times that amount. And so at some point you have to stop saying what is a reasonable level of radiation. And so all of these kind of internal things are being debated right now. There's some legislation in the U.S. Senate to change some of these. So the short answer, I don't know how it's going to shake out at NRC. If they do get this permitting through the Department of Energy going, in some ways it's going to put pressure on NRC to become a better organization. I mean, maybe they'll react to that positively and say, oh, yeah, maybe we should be doing things a little bit differently. I hate to bash NRC because there are a lot of good people over there. There are a lot of good people working in really poor circumstances.
Yeah.
They've had poor leadership. And I'm hopeful that over the next 12 months, we're going to see some major improvements in NRC. But I still think the pathway through DOE is very exciting. And so you can, both ways. I think we are now on the cusp of really moving forward. I mean, I really mean that.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't look like it because nothing is happening. I mean, not a lot is happening, but I used this analogy recently with another conversation, and it's not mine, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but I said, he described the nuclear industry right now in the U.S. as like a duck sitting on a moving river. Yeah. And the duck is sitting still in the middle of the river, but the river is raging past. Well, that duck is paddling damn hard underneath the water to stay in that spot. And I think there's so much going on underneath the water, behind the scenes. There's so much going on in the nuclear industry right now, really positively, that we are not seeing. And I do think we're going to see really within the next couple of years some huge things happening.
Yeah, I mean, we forget that Trump is 6 months, 7 months
Yeah.
in the office, right? I mean, there's still a ways
Going to take
ahead. So presumably, let's say like the stuff with the DOE goes through, can states still take matters into their own hands? Because we're sort of seeing this at play on the emission side. You know, a lot of the SEC climate proposals were stripped away, rightfully so. You see, I believe the Big Beautiful Bill delayed the implementation of the methane tax for like 10 years, which basically made it obsolete. But here we go again, California having their own, I think it's State Bill 252 or 253, where if you're doing business in California and you have this minimal threshold of revenue, that you have to abide by their state level regulations. So, like, do you still see that? Do you see something like that play out with nuclear? Because my understanding, and I would love your clarification on that, like our friend Pritzker, who is, you know, Newsom's long lost cousin, let's call it, you know, he's decommissioning nuclear and Illinois runs on nuclear. And I can't connect the dots on that. So can you help me like just navigate that?
No, and I do think that we're going to see a much better environment for licensing nuclear power plants through the federal government, whether it's through DOE or whether it's through the NRC. I think we're going to see much improvement there. Right now the belief is you have to have a federal permit to cite something, even if you're citing it in one of these states. But you also have to have state approval. So so even if you get NRC approval to do a plant, if California says, I'm sorry, but we're not putting plants here, I think they can at a state level thwart whatever good intentions are. Now, a lot of those barriers are coming down. You know, they're coming down in almost all states, or making it easier for nuclear. But yes, you're going to have both the state permission and the federal permission at this point, except on federal lands. So I think that's the idea is if you to put a nuclear power plant in a state like California where it's not allowed, and you could put it on a Marine base or an Army base.
Yeah.
Now there's going to be an argument. California's been assert jurisdiction, but I think the feds are going to win and say, this is our land. You can't tell us what to do with our land. That's what this is laid out.
Do you think that delays the process of getting stuff done because presumably that stuff will go to court?
Well, and if it's in a state like California, it probably will. But I mean, there's so many places now that are genuinely, you know, Texas is just all in on nuclear energy.
Yeah,
I mean, why would you go to California when you've got so many other places now that are begging for it? So Tennessee, Wyoming, Utah, don't go to Colorado. You know, you build it in Wyoming across the border.
Yeah, what is the deal? I mean, California and Illinois and the Northeast tend to get the vast majority of the attention, but Colorado is interesting in its own right. Like, what's the state of the state in Colorado? What's going on there?
We're a hot mess. And you know, it's really interesting that the state has definitely been tugged to the left the last decade or 15 years. And that's partly because we've seen a huge migration of people from across the country here. That was aggravated or accelerated when we were the first state to allow recreational marijuana. And so we had people coming from all 49 states coming here because they could legally buy and smoke marijuana or eat it, whatever. And so we had a big influx. And the problem with that is most of those people did not come here seeking a job. They came here seeking marijuana. So we had a big influx of people who weren't really productive. I mean, some of them, I don't want to say everybody was, but we had a lot of people coming here, you know, hey, dude, let's get in the car and go to Colorado and get our legal pot. So that accelerated. That was the only thing. But we have had a huge migration of people from Wisconsin, Illinois, Oregon, Washington, California, and so they've all come from. They haven't all, but a huge percentage have come from blue states, so-called blue states, and so the politics of Colorado has shifted to the left. It hasn't shifted as much population-wise as our legislature has shifted. And so this is the real problem with Colorado right now is we've always been a purple state. And I heard someone say the other day, for decades, we would have a Democratic governor and a Republican governor, a Democratic senator and a Republican senator, and we're always kind of right down the middle. And you really couldn't even tell the difference in policies, not substantial differences between a Democratic governor and a Republican governor. The differences would be on the fringe. The core values were very centrist.
Yeah.
And Colorado is still publicly and demographically still probably a purple state. It's probably a very centrist state. But what's happened is our legislature has been co-opted by the radical wing of the Democratic Party. And I didn't even realize, because I've seen this massive shift of unbelievably radical legislation the last few years. In fact, last year, they introduced a bill to stop all oil and gas permitting completely. Now, the governor stepped in, the Democratic governor stepped in and said, this is just way too far. But what's happened is essentially we have a legislature that is way, way, way far left of the real feeling of the Colorado people. We are not, as the Coloradans as a whole, are not as left as the legislature is.
Right.
I did not understand what had been happening, but a friend of mine who's been a high-level Democratic operative for many, many years, for 50 years in Colorado, he recently retired, and he finally was willing to spill the beans because he didn't have to play the game anymore. He says, Doug, do you realize that more than half of the Colorado legislature, senators and representatives, more than half of the Democrats were not elected? It's like, what?
What?
He said, no, we have taken on a strategy the last 10 years. We will run moderate Democrats, people who can get elected, people who are actually representative of the population. They're centrists, center-left, center-right, but they will run moderate Democrats. They will then step down, and the Democratic Party will appoint a radical leftist person in their place. I haven't done the research. He just told me this recently.
Okay.
He said, if you go back and check, over half of the Democratic legislators were not elected their first term. Now, once they get in, if they get reelected, they can get reelected because they have the power of the incumbency. They've raised money. They got donors, blah, blah, blah. But they are putting people who are far left of the actual population in, and we're getting very, very radical legislation being passed through. And there's a lot of worry. I'm not predicting it, but there's a lot of people that are worried once Governor Polis leaves, even though he's a pretty leftist guy himself.
Yeah.
He stepped in and saved us from that bill last year. There are a lot of people, and I'm just saying this is possible. I'm not predicting. There's a lot of people saying that bill will be reintroduced when he leaves to shut down all oil and gas permitting in Colorado. And there are a lot of people who believe that the next governor will not veto that bill, will not step in and stop it.
Is there an idea of who the potential candidates for next governor are?
There's a bunch. I think there's already 12 Republicans in the race. Not any of them will get even a serious look.
Okay.
The two that are most likely are our current Attorney General, Phil Weiser, and our current state senator, Michael Bennet.
Okay.
And both of them, again, I don't know either of them very well, but the people who I know that do know these things, both are worried that they would allow a bill that's introduced in Colorado to shut down oil and gas production. Most everybody I know believes that they would allow that to happen when they get elected. So,
and then let's just play that out. So let's assume that happens in that bill. Like, then presumably the immediate thing is an economic impact. Does that mean like Colorado has to learn the hard way over the course of time to like bring it back, or like how do you remedy that?
Yeah. So what's going to happen? Let's just game plan that they're going to pass a bill, let's say in 2027, that says we're going to phase out oil and gas permits, and starting in 2030, we're only going to allow X number of permits to be granted, and by 2032 there'll be no new permits. And so then you'll have people still drilling, even beyond 2032, because they'll have permits in hand that are good for 2 or 3 years. But eventually the permits run out, and then oil and gas production falls. And we've already seen that now. Nobody wants to operate in Colorado even now,
Right.
and you've seen our production fall considerably, and you've seen we had a huge state budget deficit this year. And I'm told that the budget deficit this year was almost exactly equal to the amount of reduced oil and gas tax revenue that was realized over the last year because of the reduced volume of oil and gas exploration. So I don't know if that's true, but basically we're already feeling it. People aren't drilling as much. People aren't coming to Colorado. We're not developing new projects. Gas drilling is going down. Oil and gas sales is going down, and so the revenue from that is going down, and so it's going to hurt the economy. I mean, oil and gas is still a big part of the Colorado economy. Colorado, I believe, is still the 5th largest producing state, and so over the next 10 years, if they pass these bills, it's going to fall. Now, I do anticipate if they pass that law, there's going to be all these huge lawsuits, because you have all these landowners and all these companies who are going to say,
Right.
this is a public taking. You're taking our right to develop our minerals, and that could play out but it could be a decade for that to go through the court system. So, Colorado, I'm a little bearish on the oil and gas business here. I'm not predicting it's going to get shut down, but I think it's a possibility.
It's a possibility, yeah. If you had to weight it on a probability, what's the probability?
I would say it's more than 50% likely that we will have a bill passed and signed by the governor that says that permitting will be stopped. I think it's at least 50% chance that would happen. Now, if it happens, then what's the chance that it's going to hold up under court? That I don't know what probabilities of that is, but
Okay.
I don't have a lot of faith that we're going to have a governor that's going to be willing to stand up against it.
And then why do you think, I mean, the 12 Republicans that you laid out just don't have or it's more of the voting base, or like, what's that dynamic?
I mean, it could change. I mean, it's possible. We're not as far gone as California, but 2/3 of our legislature is Democrat. And so, the demographics have changed enough where I just don't see any future senators or state representatives. I mean, even not state representatives, but governor, lieutenant governor ever being public then again anytime soon. That maybe gets bad enough. They're talking in California possibly that I saw that Kamala in a recent poll was polling only 41% against a generic unnamed Republican in California. Well, that's pretty shocking.
Yeah.
I don't believe it, and I don't believe that California is going to vote Republican, but it has certainly moved a fair amount.
What about like the stuff that's going on in Illinois? So I kind of alluded to this before. Pritzker is decommissioning nuclear, and Illinois runs on nuclear. And then what can you tell me about like what that dynamic in Illinois looks like?
Well, as you know, Illinois is where nuclear power began. It was first produced there, and experimentally, and they have a huge history and legacy of nuclear energy. They are currently still the largest producer of nuclear energy in the country. Yeah. They some people call them the Ontario of America. They have a high percentage of nuclear energy. Now, I thought, I may be wrong, I've stopped following Illinois as closely, but I thought that they had gotten beyond shutting any plants down. I know back 2 years ago, they were trying to close down Byron and Dresden. Mm-hmm. Things were moving that direction. They had just closed Indian Point. Palisades was closing in Michigan, and so Byron and Dresden were on the chopping block, but they successfully, literally at the 11th and a half hour, right before the midnight deadline, they got a deal done with the legislators to put together a package of benefits and stuff to keep those plants open. So I'm not, I may be misinformed. You may know more than I do, but I'm not aware of any current efforts on plants in Illinois. I know that was a big thing for a while, but I think we've gotten past that. And now there's now they're trying to push legislation to allow new nuclear to be built in. And I think that, again, I'm on the periphery of this, so I may be wrong, but I think they were able to pass a bill that would allow small modular reactors to be built in Illinois. But, they want to have the ability to build gigawatt scale, AP1000 scale. Yeah. So I think they're still making that fight right now and saying, why are we limiting our ability to build these to just small ones? Why can't we build big ones too? So I think Illinois has turned the corner as far as I know. I'm not aware of any current efforts to shut down.
And then one of the other things that we didn't talk about, and I think it goes generally unspoken in the consensus narrative, you talk about the national security component, and it irks me, but it also is like, it's a head scratcher. China owns 85% of the renewable, predominantly wind and solar supply chain. And clearly, like, at best, we have a frenemy relationship with them. What goes undiscussed is the supply chain for nuclear is actually pretty American centric, isn't it? Like, and particularly with uranium mining. Can you lay that out?
I say it's potentially. I mean, we don't really have a supply chain because we haven't built anything. Right. But yes, we could be. I mean, you're going to need to mine uranium or thorium, and you're going to need to process uranium and thorium.
And we could do that in the United States.
And we could do that. We have lots of uranium.
Yep.
People don't want mining in their backyard, and so that's a problem. A big problem is a lot of our uranium resources and our thorium resources are located in the West on Native American lands.
Okay.
And I just wrote an article about this on my Substack published last week about kind of the historic injustices that we have foisted on the Native American tribes. And now I'm not going to justify it, but at the time these things were happening, we were in an existential threat fight for our survival with the Soviet Union. This is the Cold War. And so everyone's saying, if we don't build the bombs, if we don't have a deterrent, we may not be here. And so we were doing whatever we needed to have the uranium that was needed for these nuclear bombs. And we weren't really worried about people's feelings. We weren't worried about polluting the water. And of course, that was terrible. But you do have to understand in the context of the times, it was an existential threat to the country. But as a result of that, the native tribes were very poorly treated. We forced our way, I say we, the U.S. government forced their way on these reservations. They were doing mining on these reservations that without really the consent of the tribes. They were using tribal members to work in these mines without really good safety equipment, without the knowledge of what they were doing, without the knowledge of the risks. So they were treated very badly. Then also on top of that, most of the nuclear testing, most of the atmospheric testing that took place of our nuclear weapons was taking place at the Nevada test site or in other sites in the southwestern United States. And the people who were impacted by the radiation and the fallout from these bombs was mostly Native Americans. And again, they weren't told about the risk. They didn't even know these bombs were being tested. And so all of a sudden they're being showered with radiation. So having said that, we have a lot of uranium. We also have some bad baggage. Yeah. We did a bad job of taking care of the native tribes where these tests were taking place or uranium mining. So my concern now is it's going to be a lot harder to go back to them. White man shows up on the Navajo reservations and trust me, this time we'll do it right. So we got some bridge building to do on that. A friend of mine named Scott Lathrop has just started a new organization in California called Native Nuclear. He's a member of the Northern Chumash tribe. And he's doing this because he's very pro-nuclear. and he also recognizes how what a bad feeling many Native Americans have for nuclear energy.
Yeah.
And he says, I acknowledge the sins of the past, and I acknowledge that you have a really good reason to be skeptical of nuclear, but we're going to need nuclear. And he says, we never should force ourselves on these sovereign Native tribes. At the same time, he's trying to, as a Native, we go talk to these Native tribes and say, you might want to take another look at nuclear.
Right.
I don't want you to miss out on the opportunity to benefit from the mining or the processing or even have a nuclear power plant on your plot.
Right.
So we do have the uranium here. Do we have the will to mine it? That's another thing. Definitely.
Will to mine it in the sense like we don't like. What do you mean?
The
will to mine. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, the will to mine meaning you and I want to mine it, but nobody wants it in their backyard. Nobody wants to have the dirtiness. Nobody wants to have the dust. Right. So do we, as a collective society, are we willing to acknowledge that mining is sometimes a dirty business, but we still have to do it in our backyard? Fortunately, Canada has huge reserves of uranium. Okay. Despite all the nonsense and the rhetoric between us and Canada, we're still friends with Canada, and I think we have.
They're not going to become the 51st state.
Probably not. And then I think Australia has big uranium reserves. Yeah. So we have the capability. We don't need to rely on Russia for nuclear fuel. And then we can obviously set up processing facilities. But the problem with the processing facilities is they're expensive. They take a long time. Yeah. And these companies don't want to invest that unless they're sure that 5 years from now, we're not going to say, okay, you guys are too, you're going to go back to Russia. So they have to have some security and some certainty that we're going to help them be profitable over the long run.
How do you establish that? Like it was not an argument. It was a friendly debate. I was speaking at an event, and no names, one of Trump's economists was speaking, and I am anti-subsidy except for certain occasions. And this guy made a point of like, under no circumstances whatsoever should the government subsidize anything. Like that was just his stance. And he had some interesting case studies, so he wasn't necessarily just saying it for the sake of saying it. He could back it up. He did it respectfully. And so it wasn't like this contentious thing. But my question, I think he got pissed off at me because my question was like, what investor out there can or is willing to leverage their balance sheet in the tens of billions of dollars when the inherent payback period associated with nuclear is 10, 20, maybe even 30 years? Like the answer is probably no one. So doesn't it make sense that not only the government kickstarts it, but also probably insures it as well? Because I don't know any insurance companies that were big, oh yeah, let's underwrite that one. And he wasn't totally incorrect. Like it is hypocritical. Like we should not subsidize wind and solar. But my point was a little bit, and I didn't mean it to be snarky. I'm like, well, wind and solar don't work the same way that nuclear does, right? You don't have the same benefits. And he just got stuck on the S word. When we're talking about the investment, I do think that's a real barrier. Like, why would anyone write or willingly just leverage their balance sheet? So, like, where do you stand on the subsidy or kickstarting the nuclear investment?
So I think I'm probably right there along with you. My knee-jerk reaction is I don't want subsidies. So, but they made this argument for the last 20 years that we need to subsidize wind and solar to get it kickstarted. Well, I think you can make that same argument for nuclear. Yeah, and you're right. I would rather put my money in kickstarting nuclear that has a real chance of working in the long run than putting in something that's not. So so my knee-jerk reaction is I don't like subsidies, but I think there is a place for it. It just can't be outrageous and forever. It's just you got to be focused on making the outcome, especially when you're talking about national security. I mean, we're talking about another Manhattan Project. We're talking about what we were doing in World War II, and so this is a matter of national security. So you have to, and I don't want to be called a hypocrite, but I think you do have to look at it for nuclear. I heard this saying the other day, again, it's not mine, but I loved it. It says, we absolutely cannot afford to build another nuclear power plant, but we can afford to build 100. Yeah. Meaning
once we get going. I mean, you look at Baraka in the United Arab Emirates, the fourth unit there was, I believe, 40% of the cost of the first unit. So they built 4 units back to back to back to back over a period of 2 years. They built 4 units, and they had a 60% cost savings from unit 1 to unit 4.
Right.
So we know that if we can get the flywheel going, and we got to get supply chains going, we have to get employees. We don't have a workforce. So we have to get a workforce set up. If you can get the flywheel going, and you can get to where we're regularly building these things, the price can come down substantially. So I'm with you. I would not be opposed to a subsidy to get the flywheel going. The federal government saying, okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to help underwrite or backstop or provide insurance for the first 6 AP1000s that are built in the U.S. And after that, we're not going to do it. But that I can get behind that. And I think you're going to have to do the same thing for the processing too, but you're going to have to put a floor price or say we're not going to allow imports for 10 years, or I don't know what it is. But
I mean, it's very similar. Like, there is an argument that, and I don't think it's around anymore, but for a hot minute is like, well, why can't rail car providers like CSX just price themselves out of transporting coal? And the answer was simple. It's like, because that's against the law, right? The federal government dictates what price you can and cannot charge for doing that. And I can easily envision them getting involved in that manner, where it's not keeping a business on life support purely for keeping the business on life support. It's, here's a governance infrastructure with very specific milestones to where if you don't attain it, like, there really are consequences for the particular participants in that project. But to your point, I don't like being called a hypocrite either, but I don't envision any other scenario to get nuclear really rolling without subsidy. And once again, that doesn't mean it can't happen. Like, if someone can say it, but everyone's sort of saying the same thing.
In a perfect world where everyone is playing by the same rules,
right,
then we could just say it. But unfortunately, China is subsidizing their industries, and
that's the thing too.
Eat against that.
Right. It's a competitive dynamic. I think China is building, what are they, like, up to, like, they're building 5 nuclear reactors or something insane, and their gigawatts of nuclear power has tripled, I think, in 15 years, and we've stayed pretty static. Like, what I fear is, I take a very cynical stance on China, as I think you probably should, but something is going to happen bad because, I don't want to give them too much credit. If they're building nuclear facilities that quick, there's probably something that they're overlooking, predominantly on the safety side. Something bad is inevitably going to happen, like Fukushima, like in China. And I'm hoping that doesn't cause a ripple effect for, like, oh my God, we can't do the United States where it's in China. It's like, no, like, we have an entirely different health and safety infrastructure now than what China will ever probably implement over there.
Unfortunately, I think you're right, but unfortunately, an accident anywhere is going to affect everywhere. And
that's sort of what my question. Okay, well, that sucks. We have a couple more minutes. If you're dictator for the day, right? Like Dictator Sandridge, what are the 3 things that you think absolutely have to get done in the next 5 years?
Oh boy, are you talking about trends in sports, or are you talking about?
I'm talking within the energy/gas universe.
Boy, I think that what they've done the last 6 months at the Department of Energy and the Trump administration has been phenomenal. The question is, does it get all rolled back in 4 years if another administration comes in?
Yeah, or even in the midterms. Yeah,
it's really that's the hard part about democracy. They got a lot of continuity of policy in China and Russia, and you can do something and you can live by it. So I hope that things don't get rolled back. I do sense that there is a growing skepticism about this notion of net zero being possible or even desirable.
And I see that even beyond just kind of my little bubble of people, but the public more in general, and even some NGOs are, I do see that happening. That doesn't really answer your question. I think we have to keep the momentum going on nuclear energy. I think that we should stop pursuing these things that clearly make no sense. They're just virtue signaling.
Right.
If wind and solar can make sense on their own merits, great.
Yeah.
There are certain places where they do make sense. They just don't make sense being forced down our throats everywhere.
Right.
Offshore, I'm not sure if the economics are there.
Right.
For offshore wind. If it can work without a huge subsidy, why would I be against it? I mean, it's fine.
Right.
But I hope that we'll keep. We need to be making our energy policies based on physics rather than our good feelings. And so that means a lot of emphasis needs to be put on nuclear energy. I think there's still a lot of good potential for geothermal.
Yeah.
Geothermal.
That's sort of like the silent, they feel very, whatever underdog story in the sports world, like coming out of nowhere and then like doing really cool things.
Even 3 years ago, I was very skeptical about geothermal, and the new technologies I've seen. I really think that they can pay their own way. They can be beneficial. You can drill them. You can make money. They don't have to be heavily subsidized. Now, having said that, I'm really bullish. I think that geothermal has a really bright future. Having said that, geothermal produces 1%, less than 1% of our electricity. If we were to increase it by 300%, and we go to 3% of our, it doesn't move the needle.
Right.
So I like it. I support it. I think it can be a part of a portfolio, but I don't think it's going to move the needle.
I think to your point, like you bring, like people like want to implement this blanket approach to energy policy. And I think what they're coming to realize is it's very regional contingent. Like why is Canada in the Northeast all hydro? Well, because they have access to Niagara Falls. Like you can't do that shit in Phoenix. You know what I'm saying? Like hydro is great up there, and then geothermal in the desert might make sense. Wind and solar in Milwaukee probably doesn't make sense because the sun never comes out. Like I think there's this
location dependent, and it does drive me crazy when I hear knowledgeable people say, well, they're 90% electrified in Norway. I was like, 92% of their electricity comes from hydro.
Right.
Permian Basin, West Texas could be all driving electric vehicles if they had Norway's hydro resources. We don't. So, what works in Oregon doesn't work in Florida. Florida doesn't have good resources they got good sun, but it's hazy a lot of times, and the wind doesn't blow enough unless you're on the coast. You don't want them on the coast or on the beach where people can see them. So, I mean, what works in one place doesn't.
As a Floridian, I would absolutely not want that. No, thank you.
Yeah, so you do have to take a location-specific approach to all of these things. Yeah. So what is working in Hawaii is not going to work in Boston. So, and let's stop trying to force it. So for me, policy-wise, we shouldn't be pursuing hydrogen when economically it absolutely can't make sense. It's kind of like ethanol. Okay, one thing I do, get rid of the ethanol subsidies. And of course, the farmers in Iowa are going to be really mad about it. But it is just terrible policy. It is total. First of all, it was virtue signaling to begin with, and now we continue doing it because we have to vote because Iowa has the first caucus, and so nobody can offend anyone in Iowa. But the reality is, subsidies for ethanol are ludicrous. Ethanol is not good for your car engine. Right. It's not good for food prices. It's not good for water. It's not good on any level. There's just nothing virtuous about corn ethanol.
Right.
So get rid of corn ethanol.
I agree, man.
Mission nuclear. And so I don't know if I answered that question.
No, it was great. I mean, look, this seems like we talked for 5 minutes. We're 90 minutes deep. I can't thank you enough for your time. I think one of the takeaways is we need to do another 90-minute session. No, because we got to like maybe half of what I had down in my notes. But thank you so much.
We didn't even talk about oil and gas executives for nuclear.
No, I know. Like, why? Yeah. Why do we? Can you give the pitch? Like, where do we find your stuff? Like, where should we go?
Back to, I told you that I was working with these advocacy groups. And again, I don't want to make out like I was a big part of them. I was actually using these nuclear advocacy groups as my education. I would sit and listen to phone calls and listen to the arguments and learn about grassroots advocacy. And I did learn the power of that. I mean, to be honest, Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant in California was saved largely by non-paid grassroots advocates, Mothers for Nuclear, Stand for Nuclear, all these organizations that really were just dedicated to saving that power plant and understand how important it was to California, both for clean energy, just energy security, energy reliability, energy affordability, all those reasons. These people did that. Nobody got paid to save that plant. They were all, so I might take my hat off to them. But I got, this organization was founded based on a conference call I was on with the Save Diablo Canyon group. I was sitting there, as I normally did, on mute, listening to what everyone was saying. And somebody who will remain unnamed, who's a friend of mine, said, well, you oil and gas guys hate nuclear energy. And what's worse is your industry has had a history of undermining our industry. And that's one reason we're in the shape we're in. I was like, oh, okay, hang on.
Here we go.
Myself off of mute.
Here we go.
I can't stand for that because that's just not true.
Right.
I don't believe that to be true. I don't know all 3 or 4 million oil and gas workers in the U.S. I can't speak for everyone, but I know a heck of a lot of people. And I said, I don't know anybody in my industry who's anti-nuclear. Maybe in 1965, maybe there was somebody. I don't know. But I said, I know a lot of people. And we, as oil and gas people, we are very sober. We are knowledgeable. We understand the industry. And even we understand energy. And so even though nuclear is not our sector, we all appreciate the great value that nuclear provides in terms of safe, reliable, affordable energy. And I said, we love nuclear energy. And I said, I am not aware of any organization or any company who is overtly working against nuclear energy. We need all of it. We need more nuclear energy. So I was kind of mad. And so that was my pitch. And so then after I get off the phone call, I think to myself, I've been in this nuclear advocacy space for a couple of years, and I wasn't really sure what I could offer. And I realized this is really counterproductive to have their industry wrongly believing that our industry is against them. This is a wasted effort. This is wasted energy if you think we're fighting against you. So I said, maybe something I could do for the cause is I could prove or dispel this. And if we can dispel this myth, then we can get beyond that and put our energy towards something more productive, like saving nuclear power plants or building new ones. So I thought to myself, I think maybe what we should do is have a formal declaration of support for nuclear energy, and we're going to get as many oil and gas executives to sign it as we can. Yeah. So that was my idea. But then again, I think, well, who am I? What gravitas do I have? So I texted Chris Wright. And I said, Chris, and I didn't even at the time realize how big of an advocate for nuclear he was. Yeah. He's personally invested in nuclear. His company was invested in nuclear. He studied nuclear energy. He's a big nuclear guy. So I texted him, and he texted me back and says, this is a great idea. I love it. Let's do it. And so the Diablo Canyon group inspired me to the idea. Chris encouraged me to do it. And so I wrote this declaration. It was 2 pages long. It took me a few months to do it because at one point it was 1 page long. At one point it was 6 pages long. And I was like, what's the right link? What's the right tone? And I finally settled on a 2-page document. The first page describes how important energy is to human flourishing, to humanity. And then the second page is how important nuclear energy is to provide safe, reliable, affordable energy. And I wrote this declaration. I sent it over to Chris. And I emailed it to him with a note that says, okay, this is my first rough draft of what wasn't my first for him. I said, this is a rough draft of what I want to put out there. Is this something you'd be willing to sign? Please send me back your comments, your edits, everything else. Maybe 30 minutes later, his assistant Izzy says it back to me, signed. He was the first person to sign it, and he signed it without any changes. He said, "I love it. It's good as is." So he signed it. I became the second signatory party, and now we've gone out and we've had 100 people.
That's great.
50 people, executives sign it. And some pretty big names. Toby Rice at EQT, and so anyway, it's been. It's just a labor of love. I mean, this is not really meaningful in any way, but it does open the door to a lot of conversations. As a matter of fact, I was sitting on the plane coming back from a conference yesterday. I was wearing a shirt like this, and the guy sitting next to me was a solar developer, and he wanted to talk about it. And so, but it does give us an opportunity to talk about nuclear energy, and it also gives us an opportunity to talk about how supportive most people in the oil business are. And if anybody listening to this, is interested in signing, I'm always interested in getting more people on the signatory block. Yeah. But you can go to our website, executives for number 4 nuclear, executives for nuclear, and you can see all the signatory parties, what the declaration looks like. And
I'm looking at it right now. Like, I would encourage everybody to check it out. Like, one of the things that I think is great, and sorry to cut you off, but I think it's worth mentioning, I find that y'all are just like, give us the data and we'll make objective conclusions just based on the analysis, right? So in other words, not preemptively going in with the winners and losers already selected as you want it. It's like, hey, give us all available information and we're smart enough where we can make the determination on what works best from there.
Ultimately, the physics will decide these policy issues. The physics don't lie.
Right.
Physics can't be manipulated. So let the physics determine what we do and what we don't do.
Yeah, math is undefeated, man. Math.
Exactly.
Math is undefeated.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. We're going to have to do part 2, like I said, in the not too distant future. But I would encourage everyone, check out the oil and gas executives for nuclear. The work that you've been releasing and the writings are great. And looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, and the other one I'm going to plug is I do write articles about energy. It's not just one type of energy, and it's called, it's on Substack. It's Energy Ruminations.
Yep.
So subscribe to Energy Ruminations on Substack, and it's a labor of love. I don't charge for the Substack. I write about whatever hits my heart that day. I write about what interests me. I don't write quick. Most of my articles, I have a hard time fitting them into the maximum number of words that are allowed. I like to give historical background on articles. I like to do a deeper dive. I don't do a superficial, hey, read it in 30 seconds and go on to the next article. My articles, I work on usually for months at a time, and they're a deep dive into whatever subject I'm working on. So I'd love for you to.
Can you get that through your LinkedIn?
I put a link on my link.
Yeah, you need a link on your LinkedIn. So just real quick, the name of the Substack is, what is it again?
Energy Ruminations.
Ruminations.
Okay. Google Energy Ruminations. It'll pull it up on Substack.
Soon to be have a link on your LinkedIn profile as well.
I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to do that.
Great, man. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, we're looking forward to the next one, sir.
I'll see you next time I'm in Houston.
Thank you, my friend.
See you, buddy.